Awesome.
All right, well, thanks again for having me and man, the Holy Spirit is really thick in here, so. All right, so I'm gonna share, my testimony, and I feel like that song just does a really good job of sharing my testimony, you know, because for so much of my life I really was driven by, winds that just led me to nowhere, and you know, just lost, seemingly drifting in an endless sea of sorrow and pain, stuck in a perpetual cycle of wanting to be free and recognizing that I needed to be free, but never able to free myself. And so, I grew up in a single parent home. My mom was she's amazing. She loves Jesus. She raised us to know God, and I was raised around a lot of people that really loved Jesus. But I always wanted to be accepted and loved. In the way that this world raises us to view love is, it's completely false. It's empty. And I just always was looking for love and acceptance. And because I didn't know God, I was unable to receive the love and acceptance that was really right there in front of me. I wish I could say that, I grew up in some kind of crazy home where I was, abused, and I don't really wish that, but I mean, part of you is like, I don't even have an excuse, like, I know a lot of people that were raised in those kind of environments, but I wasn't one of those people. I didn't have really a dad growing up, because my dad is from Mississippi, and when my mom and him split, my mom was originally from St. Louis, and so we moved back to St. Louis, and so I grew up in St. Louis without a father. Not to say that there weren't other father figures in my life from the churches that we attended, well, one church. But, I think looking back on that, that probably had a lot to do with, what was missing in my life. And I think, having a father figure there to be the representation of our ultimate Father in our life is very important. And if you don't really have that, it robs you of a grid, right? It robs you of a grid for that kind of love, You're like, oh, well, I'm supposed to know a father's love, but I've never known a father's love, right? And so I grew up looking for that acceptance in, all of the wrong places, and didn't understand why I couldn't watch PG-13 movies. Like, I just was like, everybody, I grew up in a Christian school, and like everybody at the Christian school, they were all like watching crazy movies, like rated R stuff. And my mom was like, I'm not gonna let you do that, because I have to stand before the Lord one day on how I've raised you, and I'm not gonna stand there and say I compromised, And thank God for that, because she really set an example for me that I would later come to realize was the right thing and really appreciate now later on in my life. But at that time, I didn't see it. I just thought she was just like getting some kick out of being strict, right? Like and that's kind of how we are with God, right? He's like, yeah, don't touch that, that'll burn you. And I think he's like trying to just tell us what to do, not realizing that there's love and purpose behind every instruction, right? And so I just was very rebellious growing up. Um, I went to a Christian school from first through 8th grade. And at that Christian school, I was completely rejected by every kid. And it was a small school, so there was like 35 kids in my class, and every single one of them just rejected me completely. And they would pour sugar in my hair at lunch and push my head in the lockers, and I would come home and I'd be like, I would just cry. I'm like, why are they doing this to me? And all of their parents were like staff at the school, so nothing ever got done about it. And I just, I was rejected even there. And so no matter what I did, I tried to fit in, and I just couldn't fit in, right? And so halfway through my 8th grade year, I ended up giving a kid a concussion and put him in the hospital for picking on me. And so I got kicked out of there. I tried going to a different private school, and that didn't work either. So my mom eventually had no choice but to put me into a public school. And when I went to public school, I found that there was a place for me. Like, those kids accepted me, and I just found, my acceptance in the world that I already longed to be a part of. And so I was extremely manipulative. I was a liar. I became really good at being a chameleon and just presenting whatever kind of character I wanted to in front of whoever I thought needed to see that. And so, I dropped out halfway through my sophomore year, and I would go back and forth. I would vacillate back and forth because deep down inside, I knew that Jesus was who he said he was. I knew that God was real. I knew I had experienced God before in my life, but I never gave God everything. I would come to God in my brokenness at a certain point in life, and I would say, God, I need help. I'm like my life is crazy, and I need you to do something. And he would, and then I would walk with him for a little bit, but I always, it says like a dog returns to its own vomit. So is somebody who's come to know the Lord and then goes back to the world. And so that's what I would do. And I would continue to do that through my high school years. And Mike actually ended up giving his life. We went to the same high school. And he actually ended up giving his life to the Lord through one of the counselors there that led him to the Lord. And a friend of mine that I grew up with, my best friend Jamie, he kind of hooked us up, and we hung out. And I would come around for, what was it, like 3 or 4 months at a time? Yeah, and then I'd be off into the world, and then I'd come back, and so so that's how me and Mike kind of grew up together. When I was following the Lord, that was the clique that was the circle of friends that I would hang out with. People that were really running after Jesus, and so I just I never really gave God everything. I knew God required me to give him. I knew it took, absolute surrender, but I never was willing to do that. And so for years, that was the cycle of my life. And, I was like experimenting with drugs and stuff like that in high school, but I never really got real hooked on anything. And then, so fast forward to my mid-20s. I was always really anxious because I really cared so much about what people thought of me. And so I found alcohol to be a very good social lubricant for me, right? It would keep me loose. It would make me comfortable. And I felt like I could really be myself when I was drinking, And for a long time, I would have moments where I was like way far out there, but for the most part, I kept it under pretty good control. And I was about 27, and I was working at a friend of mine's head shop, and these guys came in, and they really took a liking to me, and they were drug dealers, and they just kind of recruited me to start selling for them. And they knew that I was, at that point I had like built a pretty big social network within, St. Louis and the surrounding areas. So they saw that I could, be a pipeline for them. And so they started just, giving me stuff, like fronting me stuff to sell. And so I did, and started making a lot of money. And I liked that, and liked being able to do whatever I wanted to do. And so I just started selling drugs, and in the midst of that, I met my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, who she kind of knew what I was up to, but she not, yeah. And then once she moved in with me, and she went into, like, I had a huge walk-in closet, and I had, a lot of drugs in there, and she was like, "What is going on here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, don't go in there," So, and so then she kind of knew, like, at what level I was dealing at that point. But I was not a good boyfriend, and her and I ended up getting, pregnant with our son Maverick, who's here. And I wasn't a good dad. It wasn't good to anybody, because I just did whatever I wanted to do. I was like, oh, I'm finally free. Like, I have all the money in the world. I have friends. I can, do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. And being under the kind of pressure that you're under whenever you're responsible for, at the peak of what I was doing, I was responsible for more than $1 million a month worth of product. And so being under that kind of pressure, not only from, you got to worry about if anything happens, then you owe money to the kind of people you don't want to owe any kind of money to. You got to worry about people who want to rob you, want to rat on you. You got to worry about the cops constantly, you constantly feel like you're under investigation, and you probably are, and so under that kind of pressure, I just drank. All of my networking was done in the clubs and in the bars anyway, so that's what I did. I drank. I used every excuse to just be out at the bar. I mean, all the time. I'm like, I gotta go work. I gotta go. Even when I didn't have to work, I'd just go out and that's. So I lived, from the time I was probably about 28 to the time I was like 35, in the bars, in the strip clubs, out every night, and I thought I had it all figured out. And I thought, man, I've worked my way up this corporate ladder. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Like, I'm going to be a drug dealer. And, like, that's what you think, right? You're like, yeah, this is it. This is, I'm living the dream. And, that doesn't, I did that for a long time. I got away with it a lot longer than most people do, but, by the mercy of God, things started falling apart. I became an alcoholic, a real alcoholic, to where I was, sleeping with a fifth of Jameson on my nightstand, and I would get up in the middle of the night and hit that to go back to sleep. And then I got introduced to opiates. My buddy was doing Roxy's, and I'm like, oh, that's not heroin. I'm like, okay. So I just started doing Roxy's. I had the money to buy, pills instead of heroin, so I just started doing that. I got hooked on those, obviously, because everybody knows what happens with that. And so, at about 35 years old, I'm an alcoholic. I am hooked on opiates. I'm a drug dealer. At this point, I've quit all the legal forms of work. And and this kid underneath me gets busted, of course, and then he rats on me, and he was like my top earner, and he lost all of my money and some of their money, and not only did I have all of my eggs in that basket on that specific day, but then he flips on me. And so my life came to a halt immediately. And at that point, I was just like, well, what am I going to do? You know, like I have nothing. I've lost it all. I've squandered all of my money. The money that I did have, I lost. I have some very serious people that are going to be mad at me, and now I have the drug task force to worry about and all this other stuff, and I just was like, I contemplated suicide very seriously. I had a loaded Mossberg in my mouth on numerous occasions, to the point where my wife had to call my mom when I was passed out one night to come get my guns out of the house, and I was just losing my mind. And I finally, in the story of the prodigal son, there's a moment where he's next to the pigs eating slop, and that's where I came to. Right? It says all of a sudden he came to his senses and he didn't remember who his dad was, right? And that's what I did. I had a brief moment of clarity where I was like, wait a second. God, right? God. Hold on, God's real. Wait, right? And so I was just like, God, if you could hear me, there's probably not much left of my life, but if you want what's left of it, you can have it, and you can have it all. Like, I won't hold on to anything. Like, I'll do anything that you want me to do, right? I'll do anything that you want me to do. And I'm sorry, And I'm like sitting there, and I said that prayer, and then I'm like, okay. I'm like, what am I waiting on? Because I was so hardened at that point. I could feel nothing. And I actually prayed in the midst of my dealing in addiction that God would harden my heart. I said, Satan or God, who's ever listening, because I always had a really soft heart. I said, whoever is listening, whoever's willing to listen, will you please harden my heart, because this heart of flesh has no place in the world that I lived in. And so I didn't realize that had happened, but it actually did happen. And so I'm like, okay, what am I? And then all of a sudden I just had an idea, right? And I'm like, this is not me talking. And I'm like, and it was, you need to marry your wife, who wasn't my wife at the time. We had been engaged for 5 years. I was like a real piece of work to live in. Huh? Oh, we were engaged for 6 years. Okay. So he was like, you need to marry your wife. And I was like, okay. And so I woke her up. I was like, God, I don't even think she's going to want to marry me at this point. We had just got back together. We had split up numerous times. But so I was like, hey, do you still want to get married? And she looked at me. She was like, are you serious? And I said, yeah, I am. And so 2 weeks later, we were married. And at that point when I asked her, I was still addicted to opiates, and I was still an alcoholic. But I just said, all right, God, you're going to have to help me with the opiates, right? Because I had tried to get off before, and I was like, yeah, there's no way. I'm not going through that. I'll just stay on pills for the rest of my life. And so he did. I had 1 8-milligram strip of Suboxone that a friend had given me. And if anybody's ever been through opiate addiction, that's not enough. Right? But I used it for that first day, right? I just took the 8-milligram strip after I had already, because you got to wait until you're sick to actually take it. So I waited till I was, till it was coming out of both ends. And then I took the 8-milligram strip. That appeased it for, basically that day. And then the next day, I started getting sick again. And then I went through it. I went through the withdrawals. And I was still drinking at the time, but, I didn't sleep for 19 days because you just can't. It's like impossible. And I would drink until I should have died. And I couldn't. I would pass out for like 5 minutes, and then I would wake back up. My legs would be going crazy. I just couldn't sit still. I had all these crazy thoughts going on in my mind, and but I got through the opiate withdrawals, and I was just coming off of like the tail end of those withdrawals, but still drinking. I had moved my wife and my children into my mom's house because I was like, look, there are some very bad people that are going to be looking for me, and I don't want them to find my wife and kids. If they find me, that's one thing, but if they find them, I'll kill myself. And and so my mom graciously, after all the hell that I had put her through, let them move in with her. And I started going to see this counselor who was a friend of our family. He was a Christian guy at this outpatient rehabilitation place in the city. And he knew that I had come off of the opiates, but he knew that I was also still drinking. And so I was going down there. I put myself into this program, but he was like really cool about like not really making me come. He was just happy that because I was voluntarily there, just there talking to him and just willing to try to do something. And so one of the basically like the there was a guy that was very high level in law enforcement that was working there, just kind of trying to give back to the community. And I was open. He ended up being one of my counselors, and I was open with him. And I said, "Look, this is what's going on. I have these other people who are willing to put me to work at a cheaper price per product. I can fix all of this. I can pay them back." And I was dealing marijuana, but I was dealing copious amounts of marijuana. And so he's like, "Well, it's just weed." And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, if you stay in the city, we don't really care about stuff in the city, about weed in the city." And I was like, "Man, this is God." You know, like God is hooking me up, right? Like this is God. He's just weed, right? I got the blessing I got from the law. I'm like, God, like this. So I'm driving around. So I started driving around with pounds of weed in my trunk, like praying, like, God, don't let me get pulled over, And then God spoke to me, and He said, Ryan, I do not want you selling drugs. And I said, I'm going to die and my family. Like, what would you have me do then? And He said, I would have you trust me. He said, Ryan, if you will live your life surrendered to my will, then only my will happen in your life. Wow. Right? And then He showed me in Scripture how that was true. How there were no accidents in the life of Jesus. Because even though Jesus was fully God, He lived His life fully as a man. Surrendered to the Father, obedient to the Father, and led by the Holy Spirit. And He showed me how they planned and plotted on Him numerous times to kill Him, to throw Him off the brow of the cliff. All of these times they plotted on Him, but they could never get their hands on Him because His time hadn't come yet. Wow. But then when He was standing before Pontius Pilate, Pontius said, you're not going to answer me? You better answer me because I have the authority to crucify you or to release you. And then Jesus spoke. And He said, the only authority you have over me is that which was given to you from my Father above. He basically said, I wouldn't be here if this wasn't exactly where I was supposed to be. Amen. Because I have lived my life obedient to the Father, led by the Spirit. There aren't any accidents in my life, right? And so God said, I will do the same for you. If you will surrender to me in that degree that Jesus surrendered to me, then I will do the same for you. And there won't be any accidents in your life. Praise God. And so I broke ties with everybody. I cut everybody off. I went to my mom's house. I called a friend of mine that I knew was following Jesus, and I said, look, I got to come meet you wherever you are. And he said, well, I'm at church right now. If you want to come here, we'll pray for you. We'll lay our hands on you. I'll get some elders to pray for you, and we'll see if God will do something on your behalf. And so I went, and they prayed, and something happened. And I felt the presence of God for the first time, right? And then I went home, and I was holding my 2-year-old son on my lap, and I looked at his eyes, and I saw Jesus in his eyes pouring the love of the Father out for me, and I was broken. And as soon as I saw that, I heard God say, I have removed your heart of stone and I have replaced it with a heart of flesh.
Thank you, Jesus.
And it broke me.
Yeah.
I had to set my son down because I couldn't even take it. I hadn't felt anything for years. And not only was I feeling for the first time again, but I was feeling the love of God for probably the first time in my whole life. And I was just, ugly crying and just like snotting everywhere and just like hyperventilating and like, I'm like, is this normal? And like what is happening to me? I really am going crazy. And that night, I had drank some of my mom's wine from her refrigerator because I ran out of alcohol, and I had bought a bottle of wine to replace. There was a white wine, so like I drank most of it and left like that much and poured some water in there, and I was gonna go replace it with the bottle that I had brought, right? And that night, I went to go drink that wine because I only needed about a half a bottle, and I still wasn't sleeping at this point, right? This was like 19 days later, and I went to go drink that bottle, and as soon as I went to drink, I took one sip and I felt conviction for the first time, right? And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Okay, so I put the cork back in the bottle. And I said, all right, God, because I was at the point where if I didn't have alcohol within a certain amount of time, I would start to shake and go through the DTs. And I knew that I could die, right? Not only was I still coming off of the opiates, 19 days later, hadn't slept, but now I'm going to try and kick alcohol cold turkey, right? But I just told God, I said, God, if I die from alcohol withdrawals, at least I'm going to die standing before you because I did the right thing for once in my life, right? I'm ready to die. I'll die, right? So I said that, I laid down, I got 8 hours of sleep. Miraculously. 8 hours of sleep, right? I felt rested, I felt peace. I took my wife to work the next morning, and on the way back, I asked God, why, like a dog returns to its own vomit, do I always go back to the world? And this is what he says. He said, because you've never surrendered everything to me. You have tried to come to me and hold on to things that you think are small things, but they are actually big things, and they belong in the kingdom of darkness. And you try to walk with me in the light, holding on to those things that belong in the darkness. And the time under tension between the two worlds requires one of two things to happen. Either you to let go or you to go back. You can't have it both ways. And I said, show me what it is. He said, it's your lying. It's your deceitfulness. It's your trying to hide things like you're about to do with this wine. Right? Like you were about to do, right? And I went home to my mom's house and I said, I'm going to tell her. It was so hard. It's like now, I'm like, it's so silly for, like just tell the truth, right? But when you've been lying your whole life, telling the truth is like the hardest thing in the world to do.
Wow.
Like you don't, like it's so spiritual looking back on it, but like you think that there's like this huge thing, but really it's, for me now, it's not that big of a deal, but then it was like the hardest gap to cross, And so I went downstairs and I got the bottle of wine and I brought it up to my mom and I said, this is what I was about to do. This is what I've done. And she said, Ryan, I already knew. She's like, I went to go drink a glass of wine. And I was pretty sure that Jesus had done a reverse miracle in my house. So he didn't turn the wine to water. So right? And she said, I was so mad at you because I've opened my home to you and your family in the wake of everything that you've done, all these decisions that you made, and I was going to call you and tell you to get out of my house and all this stuff. And she said, God stopped me and said, the Holy Spirit said, wait and see what he does.
Wow.
I mean, and so In that moment, that broke off of me. The lying, the deceiving, the utter lack of any integrity whatsoever in my life broke off of me. And what I found as I've walked with the Lord is that as he reveals things that need to be surrendered to him, because we surrender it all, but sometimes we have blind spots that we're like, okay, this is a character issue in my life that I haven't seen before because I've never, allowed you to reveal this. But he'll reveal it, and then he'll give you an opportunity to walk in the opposite fashion of the way that you used to walk, right? He'll say, yeah, this is an issue in your life. Now here's an opportunity for you to do something different. And if you'll step out in faith in that moment and do what might be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life to do, like telling the truth when you used to lie all the time, he will break that thing off of your life. And that's what he's done. Like, that's what he did. Like, I'm not late. Like, if I am, there's a good reason. Like, there's legitimately an accident, or there's, I have integrity in every area of my life. Like, if I say, like my mom, just to hear her the other day, she's like, if Ryan says he's going to do something, he does it. I'm like, it's like, and she would have never said that. If Ryan says he's going to do something, he probably won't do it. Like, he can, and so, also, because I didn't have money to move, because I didn't have money to even change my phone carrier or any of that, and I still had to, for months before we moved to Mississippi, I was terrified still that I was going to die every day. And, but I would step out of my house and that fear would come over me. And I would hear that voice, today's the day. Today's the day. You're going to catch a bullet today. Today's the day they want to kidnap you. Today's the day. I would say to the Lord, I would say, God, if today is the day that they come, let at least one of them come to know you through the Jesus that they see in me, and be glorified in my life one last time. Be glorified in my life one last time. I'm ready. Because I know that if they are coming, that it's only because you've allowed this to happen. And you know better than I do. And, it never came. And the whole situation, that was almost 4 years ago. And God not only delivered me from that whole situation, but he just completely changed me from the inside out. And I guess what I would say is that surrender is not something that you do once. Surrender is the altar upon which you live your life. Right? It's the altar upon which you live your life. Sometimes moment to moment, right? I surrender that to you. I surrender to you. I don't want to do this, but your will is greater than my will. Let your will be done in my life. And if you will perpetually, continually surrender your life to Jesus, he'll set you free and continue to keep you free. And when we moved to Mississippi, I got a job waiting tables at BJ's Brew House, right? I was an alcoholic, So everybody in my life's like, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're going to drink. You're going to do drugs. You're in an environment that fosters that kind of behavior, right? Everybody in the service industry drinks, smokes, does drugs. They're all sleeping with everybody. It's just a crazy environment. And, I have never drank. I've never even smoked a cigarette since then. I've never done any drugs. I've had painkillers given to me after oral surgery, and took my painkillers and then never went back to painkillers after that. Freedom is available to all of us, but it's our choice to walk in that freedom. And people are like, how did you do that? How are you? Well, that's just a special grace that's on your life. No, No, it's not, because Jesus, he doesn't show any partiality. If he did it for me, he'll do it for anybody, right? And all I did was, we lay hold of the word, what we read in the Bible, through faith, right? Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. And so Jesus says, who the Son sets free is free indeed, right? Right? So am I free or am I still bound? I'm free. Like I'm choosing to walk in that freedom. And not only did I not do any drugs or drink, but I led people to the Lord in that environment, and and so now I think after coming out of all of the major crazy stuff, there's a different battle and war that wages, because in the heat of that battle, you're so dependent on God. You're always dependent on God, but you really realize how dependent on God you are in those situations. But after coming out of that, and then, then it's like the Lord had me go to Mississippi, right? And I'm like, why? I'm like, people are coming to Jesus in St. Louis. Like, miracles are happening. Signs on. You're giving me, like, you're moving. Stuff's happening. Like, are you sure? And he had me move to Mississippi so I could learn how to pay bills, right? So I could learn how to be a husband and be a father, and so I can learn how to be responsible and do stuff that I just never did, and I've had to learn how to surrender and all of that too. And so I guess that's it, really. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. That is amazing. So yeah, I guess Crystal, do you want to do that?
Someone's reading. Who's reading?
Joe. Awesome.
Joe. Are you reading?
Cool. So we're gonna do read the 12 steps, and then after this, we've got food and everything. So I hope everybody can stay. We're gonna just kind of have an awesome time of fellowship and just hanging out and stuff like that. So you guys want to use the mic, or you just want to read loud? You want to use the mic, or you just want to read loud? Just read loud.
My name is Joe. I'm a great believer in Jesus Christ. I'm going through codependency and alcohol, and I just love the Lord.
Hi, Joe.
My name is Dustin. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I have victory over drugs, and I struggle with eating and anger and codependency.
Hi, Dustin.
This is the Celebrate Recovery 12 Steps and Biblical Comparisons. Number 1, we admit we are powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors that our lives have become unmanageable. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature.
I know that nothing is good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry out Romans 7:18.
Number 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. Philippians 2:13.
Number 3, we made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God.
Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Romans 12:1.
Number 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord. Lamentations 3:40.
Number 5, we admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs.
Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. James 5:16.
Number 6. Number 6, we are entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects or character.
Humble yourself before the Lord, and He will lift you up. James 4:10.
Number 7, we humbly ask Him to remove all our shortcomings.
If we confess our sins, He is faithful, and He will forgive us for our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9.
Number 8, we made lists of all persons we harmed and became willing to make amends to them all.
Do to others as you would have them do to you. Luke 6:31.
Number 9, we made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Matthew 5:23-24.
Number 10. Okay, number 10, we continue to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admit it.
So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. 1 Corinthians.
Number 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our consciousness, contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us, and power to carry that out.
Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Colossians 3:16.
And number 12, have a spiritual experience as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all our affairs.
Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore them gently, but watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. Galatians 6:1. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I can't remember nothing anymore. Hey,